Absolute value equations can be solved easily if you take them one step at a time. First, let's review what an absolute value is. The absolute value of a number is its distance on a number line from 0. So the absolute value of -4 is 4 units away from 0. So the absolute value of -4 is 4. Likewise, the absolute value of 4 is also 4, because it's 4 units away from 0 on the number line. Therefore, any non-zero absolute value will have two numbers associated with that absolute value. Let's look at solving an absolute value equation. Now, when we solve absolute value equations with an integer, such as x, it's going to have two different cases, either a positive or a negative. So when we have the absolute value of x equaling 2, what this means is it can be case 1, a -2, or case 2, a +2. So the two solutions are either -2 or +2. And I'd like you to notice how we write the two solutions. So let's solve a problem now. Our first problem is 4 times the absolute value of x plus 2 is equal to 24. When we solve this problem, there are 3 steps we need to follow. The first step is to isolate the absolute value. So in this case, we have to divide by 4. Now, we're doing this because it's the inverse operation. Whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other. Therefore, we divide this side by 4, so we divide this side by 4. And we're left with the equation, the absolute value of x plus 2 is equal to 6. So now we're ready for step 2, to rewrite the equation as two separate cases. So the first equation, case 1, is going to be x plus 2 equals 6, and the second is x plus 2 equals 6. So now, step 3 is to solve these equations. So for x plus 2 equals -6, we subtract 2 from each side, because that's the inverse operation of adding 2, subtracting. So we're left with x equals -8. Now to solve case 2, we have x plus 2 equals +6. We subtract 2 from each side and are left with x equals 4. So the solution can be either -8 or 4. Here, let's do a few problems. 3 times the absolute value of x minus 12 is equal to 18. So to solve this problem, we start doing our inverse operations. This is step 1. We're isolating the absolute value. So we add 12 from each side, and we're left with the 3 times the absolute value of x is equal to 30. Now we can divide each side by 3. Remember, we're still working to isolate that absolute value. What we do to one side, we do to the other. So we're left with the absolute value of x is equal to 10. Here's where we're going to have two cases. We're going to have x being equal to 10 and x being equal to -10. And this is how we're going to write the solution set. So let's look at some of our special situations with our absolute value numbers. We have this problem, 3 plus the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 3. Remember, step 1, isolate the absolute value. So we're going to do this by subtracting 3 from each side, which leaves us with the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 0. Now, we don't have a -0 and a +0, we just have 0. Therefore, there's only going to be one solution to this problem. X minus 1 equals 0, we add 1 to each side and are left with x equals 1. So in this problem, the solution was 0. Therefore, we had only one answer. Here's the next special situation I'd like you to consider. The absolute value of x plus 12 plus 14 is equal to 0. So, step 1, isolate the absolute value. We're going to do this by subtracting 14 from each side. Now I want you to watch what happens. Now we have the absolute value of x plus 12 equals negative 14. Remember, absolute values are distances. Therefore, we cannot have a negative distance. We cannot have a negative absolute value. This is called an empty set. To sum up, when solving absolute value equations, you're going to be following 3 steps. Step 1 is to isolate the absolute value. Step 2 is to rewrite the equation with 2 separate cases, one of those cases being negative and the other being positive. And step 3 is to solve the equation for both solutions. There are 2 special cases to consider when dealing with absolute value equations. If your answer to your absolute value problem is equal to 0, you're only going to have one solution. The other thing to consider is if you have a negative answer, well, remember, absolute values are distances. That would be an empty set.